I'm sure you have all seen the casualty rates the Confederation has endured in every confrontation with the Xylx. The numbers haunt me still. Entire army groups were wiped out in mere hours, overwhelmed and torn apart. Armor divisions disintegrated under bio-titan weaponry. Our garrisons reduced to bloody ruin by the relentless advance of their warrior forms. And our fleets gutted and left as scrap metal in orbit over every world we defended. Their fleets darkened the stars and clogged the sky. The Xylx do not bargain, nor do they engage in diplomacy beyond demanding the absolute surrender of the species they invade. They harvest the biological material of the living to create more of their own. They are monstrous, engaging in any warfare that grants them a tactical advantage. They feel no fear, but they understand it well enough to exploit it, using psychotropic gas, terror tactics, and the targeted slaughter of civilians and the wounded to sow panic and despair. When we were told a new race, humanity, would join the fray, we were far from hopeful. What difference could one young species make in this meat grinder of a war? A few more ships to buy us mere minutes for evacuating civilians and the wounded. Barracks talk is corrosive when morale is low. We took bets on how long humanity would last before running scared back to their home system, waiting for inevitable extermination. We debated how many hundreds of thousands they would waste in this hopeless war. The wagers were as bleak as our chances of surviving another day. And then they came. The Xylx launched their first ground assault on Copernicus, and the 17th Army Group was ordered to buy time, to delay the enemy at all costs. We had been assigned human reinforcements, a force calling themselves the Fifth Order, whatever that meant. Their commander was supposedly a seasoned veteran from humanity's last interhuman war of unification. We couldn't have cared less. I'm certain the Xylx cared even less, at first. If any of you have been fortunate enough never to witness the Xylx wage war, consider your minds blessed, my kinsmen. The Xylx are unnatural. Current investigations suggest they are a heavily genetically modified race from before the foundation of the Confederation. That day, we neither knew nor cared about their origins. All we knew was the nightmare they unleashed upon us. They swarmed with their infantry, fear-inducing bioforms of flesh and bone, created from every biological entity they had killed, captured, or harvested. These abominations wielded grafted weapons, their bodies enhanced and modified solely for war. Behind them came their spider tanks and their heavy, super heavy armor, rolling forward on grav engines that crushed the earth beneath them. Their lightest armor dwarfed our heaviest. Their bio-titans could obliterate entire battalions single-handedly. Their ships provided brutal orbital bombardment, indifferent to friendly fire or civilian casualties. To them, we were nothing but raw material, flesh to be harvested and reshaped into new warrior forms. And so they came, firing corrosive bolts of acid that dissolved tanks and bunkers, unleashing beams of catalytic energy that bubbled and liquefied flesh and bone. Then, they closed in with their twisted appendages, bone saws, serrated blades, spiked mauls, all forged from bio-enhanced cartilage and marrow, honed for butchery, harvesting, and consumption. I had seen enough friends die to know how impossible our defense was. Still, 20 million lives depended on us holding the line. So we tried. I swear to you, we tried. With our heaviest armor anchored behind defensive positions, plasma shields deployed, and artillery enough to level mountains, we braced for the onslaught. Our war striders towered over the cities we defended. 100 species stood ready for battle, plasma and laser weapons at hand, servo armor gleaming and prepared. Trenches were dug. Soldiers took their stations. We engaged them at 0712 local hour. by 0823, our lines had begun to break. At 0900, the perimeter collapsed, 10 minutes longer than the most optimistic projections had given us. A minute later, I abandoned protocol and the chain of command. I begged the humans to send anything they had to the spaceport, to save as many civilians as possible. I am sure you have all read the transcript of my court-martial. Yes, I shot my superior officer because he refused to swallow his pride and ask for help. Yes, I regret nothing. The humans responded at 0903 with a single transmission on an open channel. Understood, Ajita Command. Starfall has been authorized. Knights on their way. Look to the heavens. We are coming. So I looked to the sky. I did not know what that word meant. Knight. The translator provided only a vague definition. Mounted soldier in armor. Then a secondary translation. Someone devoted to a cause. A glitch, perhaps, but I had no time to ponder it. Then I saw them. Have any of you ever witnessed a true meteor shower? A real one, not the hollow simulations. If you have, then you have an inkling of what I saw that day. Hundreds of points of fire streaked across the heavens, descending like divine wrath, like something from legend, from a doomed era. I remember thinking about how few they were, and how insignificant their numbers seemed. And yet, I was transfixed. They had hurled themselves willingly into the abyss, into the fires of the nine hells. Their arrival ignited something within my soldiers. We dug in. We refused to yield another inch until they arrived. They had come to die with us. The least we could do was remain alive until they got there. I reformed my lines, rallying our scattered forces, holding the Xylx in a dozen breaches along the perimeter. Then, the human commander requested coordinates for something he called Nightfall. I had no idea what it meant, but I gave him the coordinates. Understood, he said, laughing as if this was all some grand jest. Brace for impact and clear the splash area. Tyrannies are inbound. I laughed too. Splash area? What were tyrannies? I did not know, and by that point I did not care. The enemy had breached our defenses, their armor rolling in. My forces were crumbling. I committed every last reserve I had to reinforce the failing positions. Then, I saw the Xylx spider tank climbing over the wall at Breach 6, covered in warrior forms and weaponry. Its thick arachnid legs scaled the fortifications, spewing fire and death. I fired my sidearm. What else could I do? Helixians and Tanithians fought at my side, unloading everything they had into the beast's armored hide. It wasn't enough. We had run out of proper anti-armor 10 minutes earlier. The last tank to breach the perimeter had been destroyed only because a madly brave private had leaped onto it and detonated 2 full belts of grenades. We had no more madly brave privates, and even if we had no more grenades. The tank fired its main plasma accelerator at a squad to my left, reducing them to smoldering, half-melted corpses. Then, it turned its weapon on us. I wondered what death would feel like, if there truly was something beyond it. Then, the sound came. A shrieking roar, rising to a deafening bellow, like some ancient primeval beast awakening from slumber. An image flashed unbidden in my mind. Scales, claws, fire, and wings that blotted out the sun. And then they landed. The shockwave sent me sprawling. The warrior forms on the tank were thrown into the air. The monstrous vehicle itself buckled and collapsed, its armor fractured, its fluids and blood oozing from the impact. A strange silence fell over the battlefield. I rose to my feet and stared into the smoke. There were 5. Only 5. Yet they felt like an army. covered head to toe in sleek black armor that made them taller than any Phylixian or Orapero. They looked like gods pulled from the myths of old. Their armor, adorned with sigils and marks I could not comprehend, bore symbols that even now elude my understanding. But one I recognized, the mark of leadership. The first of them, their leader, stood clad in an ethereal holographic display layered over their power armor. A brilliant orange, winged reptilian beast caught mid-flight, a raging storm behind it. Their helmet mirrored this image, sculpted into the form of the creature's head. The visor glowed beneath the snout, while the helmet's flared edges took the shape of spread wings. A cape, the same deep orange, billowed lazily in the wind. Yes, a cape. On a battlefield. It seemed absurd in hindsight, but at that moment, it was a banner of raw, mythic power, as if they had stepped out of ancient legends to judge the Xylx unworthy of existence. Yet, the most striking thing about them was not their armor, nor their entrance. It was their weapons. Their shoulders bristled with mounted ordnance, and they carried firearms slung on their lower backs. But in their hands, no rifles, no long-range energy weapons, only blades, hammers, and daggers. The leader wielded 2 long, gleaming swords, one in each hand. Another, clad in black and gold, bore the sigil of a roaring feline. The same storm raged behind it. He carried a massive, alien-looking breaching axe, akin to the ones our firefighters use, except it radiated lethal efficiency. A third, a true giant among giants, carried a 2-handed warhammer, its head sculpted in the likeness of a howling canid. His chest bore the same beast, standing atop a crumbling pillar, and, of course, the ever-present storm. The fourth was hunched over a fallen warrior form, its armor adorned with bones and feathers, as though designed to embody fear itself. A collar of teeth encircled its neck, and a dozen different knives were strapped to its frame. It idly prodded at the Xylx corpse beneath it, until it noticed the living ones nearby. The last was smaller than most, though still taller than the ghoul-like fourth. A blue tree stood proud upon its armor, defiant in the tempest. And unlike the others, it held an actual firearm, a long-barreled, scoped rifle. For a moment, neither side moved. Then, the reptilian leader spoke, their voice carried through open channels and amplified by speakers. "The laws of chivalry demand I offer you a choice. Surrender or retreat from this world. The offer is made. Choose quickly, or face Jovian wrath." It took me a second, a ridiculous, incomprehensible second, to realize they were speaking to the Xylx, offering surrender. To the Xylx, a species that knew only extermination and assimilation. As expected, the Xylx opened fire, and then the slaughter began. What felt like an eternity of gunfire lasted mere seconds. The Xylx barrage slowed, revealing the 5 figures still standing amidst the smoke. The leader's voice cut through the comms once more. "We will take that as a polite thank you, but no. Tyranny Amaranth, cleanse them." Then came the hypervelocity slugs. I had seen railguns before, on cruisers, on tanks, never on shoulder mounts. Blue streaks of light, razor-sharp slugs of metal. 1 volley, 5 knights, 24 dead Xylx warrior forms. And then they charged, straight into melee. Suicidal, I had thought. I was wrong. Only then did I understand what it meant when humans called themselves knights. Earth, Deathworld, they named it. We had dismissed it. Its creatures, while formidable, were nothing beyond reason. But the true horror of Earth was not its wildlife. It was its people. They were not the strongest nor the fastest, but they possessed two unparalleled gifts. First, an unrelenting will, an inexhaustible drive to push forward, to achieve, to endure. Second, their psionics. I know the rumors, that humans experimented on themselves and forced their evolution to unlock the mind's hidden potential. It is no secret, they wear it as a badge of pride. And their psionics are powerful. They enhance their speed, strength, and perception. They move with uncanny precision, predicting enemy fire before it lands. Their minds shape weapons that cut through ship plating like paper. They set flesh alight with a thought. They summon storms with their will. And they can fly. I saw it with my own eyes. The reptilian knight shot forward, an anti-gravity harness propelling him as he carved through Xylx warriors like a whirlwind. Shielded, fast, and armed with an acceleration rifle that spat death at near-light speeds. His shoulder-mounted cannons turned bodies to mist, and at close range, they became something else entirely. Gods of war, angels of death. I watched as the hammer-wielding knight shattered tanks. The sniper picked off commanders from impossible distances. The golden Lioncrest warrior tore open transport hulls with his axe. The bone-clad specter hunted among the Xylx ranks like a butcher, driving terror into the monsters themselves. 5 knights. They held the breach, and we had 100 more of them. They moved as one, reading each other with uncanny synchronicity. One cut the turret off an enemy tank, while 2 others eliminated its command crew. Another squad formed a seamless wall of destruction, slaying in perfect rhythm. The reptilian warrior, Primarch-Amaranth, I would later learn his name, was among the last to retreat. When he did, he was drenched in blood, oil, and radioactive dust. His engineers had to cut him from his armor, and he was smiling. They all were. Once aboard the human cruiser Reign of Vengeance, I bore witness to something stranger still. The human sailors treated them with reverence, standing at attention when they entered the room. When I asked why, an infantry commander named Alastair Whiteborn explained. These knights were the elite, the most gifted psionics among humanity, pushed beyond their limits to become war incarnate. They fought in packs. Tyrannies, they called them. The term came from human myths, from creatures called dragons, whose packs bore the same name. Tyrannies formed wings, wings formed flights, and flights became thunders. I asked why thunder. Primarch-Amaranth answered, "Ever heard the sound of 100 knights taking flight? The thunder comes after the lightning." We did not win that battle, but for the first time, the Xylx bled more than we did. Their advance slowed. They built fortresses instead of expanding unchecked. They prepared for counterattacks. For the first time, they hesitated. So, senators, let me be blunt. Shut the faithing up. We cannot win this war without humanity. That is not an opinion. It is fact. They wield power beyond us because for millennia, they fought themselves to the brink of annihilation. They learned to wage war better than any species in history. They understand battle. They thrive in it. And they fight not for conquest, but for what is right. We need their ships. We need their soldiers. And we need every damned knight they can muster. Because humanity excels at one thing above all else: killing monsters. Primarch-Amaranth fought at the shattering of Ilium. He fell during the nightfall of the long dusk upon Venus, and again on Mercury, during the Day of Woes. He led the starfall above Earth's skies during the liberation, and later the defense of the homeworld. He was the first knight to charge into the breach during the breaking of Luna, and he stood among the Allied spheres when they shattered the Hierophant's court over Pluto before they killed that planet with enough atomics to crack their sun in half. Yet, none of those battles compared to this. The planet before him was an azure world, its surface like perfectly blown glass from the Venusian markets. A dozen shades of blue decorated the sphere in bands stretching from the equator to the poles. Katarsis was barely larger than Earth, but far denser in population. He had heard of its beauty and mystery, qualities all forbidden worlds possess to those who yearn for discovery. Right now, that mattered less than nothing. Between his fleet and that planet, millions were dying among the wreckage of shattered starships and the carcasses of space behemoths. Bridge crews frantically tried to establish IFF signals, struggling to distinguish Xylx vessels from Confederate ships and those of the Phylesian Defense Fleet. Even at thousands of kilometers away, the void was alight with weapons discharges. The auger stations had to sift through the debris of countless space stations, minefields, and gutted ships. Yet none of the knights aboard needed augers, sensors, or even the cameras to understand what was happening in the vast void. Death, on a staggering scale. Cyrus's armored gauntlet clenched the railing on the middle level of the bridge, his eyes fixed forward, jaw tight like a European storm dragon ready to strike. The metal bent under his grip. Even at this distance, he felt the thousands of tiny sparks flickering out every minute as the Confederation fleet was butchered. The crew showed no sign of the discomfort they surely felt from the feedback on the mantle. They were accustomed to such things in the void, where thousands could vanish in an instant from a lucky shot or an overloaded generator. That, and the soul core of the Lady Morningstar, shielded them from the worst of the psychic toll. Cyrus felt the soothing presence of the PAI's soul core stretching over his senses and anima, numbing the prickling sensation in his soul from all the death. It was a welcomed reprieve he would not waste. Psionically augmented intelligences were a godsend for reasons like this. "This makes Pluto look like a Venusian solar race," Cass whispered in his ear. Cyrus had to agree with his wife. Thousands of vessels clashed in the void. Some maintained a semblance of a firing line, while others engaged in brutal, point-blank gunnery duels like drunken pugilists. A few Xylx vessels even resorted to ramming and boarding actions. The Phylesians were cunning. They had positioned their fleet at the north pole of their world, a perfect defensive stance that allowed them to intercept any planetary assault or enemy fleet while staying within optimal range of their orbital defense nets. Any enemy attempting to engage the void stations and fleet at close range would pay a brutal price in blood and metal, a cost few admirals, and even fewer sailors, could bear. The Xylx plowed through it with a callous disregard. They smashed through the defensive line, catching the Confederate fleet just outside the orbital defense ring. The sheer weight of their numbers and tonnage allowed them to weather the punishment without resorting to clever tactics or subterfuge. Whoever commanded the Confederate forces was an incompetent fool. They had tried to lure the Xylx into the defense's range, only to react too slowly and get caught completely off guard. In contrast, the Phylesian commander was ruthless. They ordered all defense stations to fire at will, using the Confederate fleet as a living net to pummel the Xylx at optimal range without contest. It was a brutal strategy, inflicting heavy damage on the Confederation fleet, who found themselves outmaneuvered and then betrayed by the very allies they were sent to protect. Yet the effectiveness of this savage tactic was undeniable, as the cameras displayed the wreckage of many gutted Xylx biovessels of the heaviest categories. The fucking kittens took out a few of the big ones. Thana mused from the upper bridge railing, her feathered cape stained with blood, and the teeth around her collar yellowed from neglect. She didn't care. It made her 1.60-meter frame even more terrifying, and judging by the pale faces and trembling anima of the augur officers, it was effective. Got in a good licking, but the bastards are still ticking. They fired on the Confederate vessels, Edik murmured, his chitinous jaws clicking as his claws tightened on the railing. His carapace had turned an icy blue. Cyrus recognized it as his species' version of paling. Not that he needed to see it. Edik's shock, anger, disgust, and helplessness echoed through the mantle like a brewing storm. Why? Because the Xylx didn't expect them to, Cyrus answered, his eyes drinking in the tactical information. By Christ, there were more ships here than during the entire Third Solar War combined. Estimated casualties, drawn from cross-referencing confirmed dead ships with Confederate records, had already surpassed most of the first year of the Solar War alone. They went in to board and harvest all biological material from those vessels. Those ships were likely filled with troops and positioned near enemy carriers, or transports. Easy targets for planetary-scale weaponry, especially against a competent and prepared fleet. It's barbaric, the Valdori Field Marshal said, his voice trembling slightly. Treacherous. The only treachery here is whoever put such an amateurish commander at the head of your fleet, my good fellow, Gavilan remarked, his tone cavalier, seemingly unfazed by the deaths of so many thousands. If he had been given the chance, he would have executed the fool who allowed the fleet to fall into such a predicament. They tried to taunt those abominable things into range, and failed miserably. A poor attempt at a riposte, if I may say so. The Xylx are within the first ring of Felisian guns, Cassandane observed, her emerald eyes analyzing the same data as her husband. What do you want to bet they're aiming for the satellite? Augur, give me a reading on that moon. Class C satellite, Dictator. One of the augur officers responded, her face contorted into a grimace as she mentally navigated her instruments through a labyrinth of dead superstructures and drifting bodies. Twice the radius of Phobos. There's significant interference from weapon discharge and engine bloom, but I can tell you the surface is covered in plasma shields and powered by enough generators to sustain a fleet. That's Zenus, the only moon of Katarsis, Udik explained, more for the crew's benefit, as the officer had already been briefed during transit. The Felisians transformed it into an orbital fortress. It's layered with bunkers, supply tunnels, orbital batteries, and hangars. It also houses a massive shield generator array to protect it from orbital annihilation. It's the perfect choke point for any fleet attacking their capital world. I'm guessing it's also their command center for the defense? Cass asked, her crimson mane falling back as she began to braid it telekinetically, an ancient Peloponnesian tradition favored by Martians. Her hands were preoccupied with inspecting her husband's armor. Cyrus let her continue. Ever since the decompression incident over Phobos, she had been particularly meticulous about his armor's integrity. He sent a small psionic wave of comfort and mirth her way, and received a playful shove in return, accompanied by a light chuckle that resonated in his mind. It's the most logical possibility, yes, Udik admitted. So the Xylx aim to harvest whoever is inside that fortress moon, Gavilan mused, his battle-hungry smile revealing his eagerness for combat. How skilled are the Felisians at close quarters? The best, Udik replied neutrally, but no one on the bridge missed the undercurrent of anger in his anima. The reasons for his resentment remained a mystery. Until we met you, of course. Boss, we could drop right on top of the bastards, Thana suggested, hanging upside down from the upper bridge deck. Her unkempt dark hair cascaded downward, giving her the appearance of a demon from ancient myths. Full-on spear-tip assault. We have the knights for it, and enough infantry to choke them on that little metal moon they're so eager to take. My boys are thirsty for new trophies. Too slow. Balan's powerful voice reverberated across the bridge. The Ionian spoke rarely, but his words always carried weight. We need to end this quickly. If they adapt, we lose our chance. Balan is right, Nokoribi. Himiko's calm voice contrasted with her husband's bluntness as she spoke from the shadows where she sat cross-legged on a meditation couch. We didn't come for a prolonged ground war. We are an assault force meant to break through and evacuate survivors. Hit and run. That's why we brought so many Mercurian vessels. It's their specialty. She was right. The Mercurian MidJourney, the Solar Knight's predecessor before the Accords of Sol, exemplified this approach. Silent specters striking from the shadows before vanishing again. The MidJourney embodied Mercury's war doctrine. Strike unseen, relentlessly, until the enemy is too crippled to fight back. Mercury wasn't called the sphere of the all-devouring sands solely for its deserts. You didn't want a sandstorm with MidJourney on your tail. The Hierophant's legions learned that lesson the hard way. But as Cyrus stared into the void, calculating probabilities, a pit grew in his stomach. The Xylx had adapted to every Confederate tactic. What began as skirmishes at the Outer Rim escalated into full-scale invasions. 10 years of brutal attrition wore down the Outer Rim fleets, who were pushed back time and again. The Xylx adapted after every battle, improving their weapons, ships, armor, and tactics. They fine-tuned their arsenal, employed psychological warfare, and repurposed the biological advantages of their enemies. They were an unstoppable force, snowballing into a relentless juggernaut. The Confederation's military command saw it. The Archduke of Europa saw it the moment he reviewed the intelligence reports. Cyrus couldn't afford an attrition war. How long before CSI weapons lost effectiveness? Before countermeasures neutralized their railguns and pulsars? He couldn't allow the Xylx to adapt any further. There was only one answer. You break the teeth and shatter the jaw. Dragons don't flee from vermin, they reduce them to ashes. And if Thana had her way, they'd piss on the ashes for good measure. The enemy couldn't adapt if they were all dead. I don't intend to evacuate anyone or anything, Cyrus declared, rolling his neck.
Cyrus, my good lord.
Gavilan's eyes narrowed, studying him as one might observe a wild beast.
Has he gone primal on us?
He turned to his wife, Thana, who merely shrugged, although the gleam in her eyes revealed her excitement. Cassandane circled around her husband, emerald eyes locking onto his amber ones with a sharp crack of psionic power. You intend to beat the Xylx back here? It wasn't a question. We don't have the ships for that. But as our resident she-devil pointed out, we have the knights, Cyrus replied, his gaze shifting back to the tactical displays, and the element of surprise. He gestured to the hololithic screens. We use the Philesian defenses as the anvil. We are the hammer. We strike from behind with all our might, sweep them forward, and crush them into the orbital defense net. We'll be on the receiving end of plenty of friendly fire, Gavilan warned, and judging by the Philesians' attitude towards acceptable casualties, it's not an option I relish. Then we coordinate with them, Cyrus stated, rising to his feet. They used the Confederate fleet out of necessity. We need them to believe we can save their world if they help us. I'll handle that, Udik volunteered. Might be useful to remind the Philesians they just violated enough intergalactic laws to fill one of your destroyers. I may have some leverage to make them comply. My thanks, Field Marshal. Cyrus bowed in gratitude, reinforcing the partnership between the Authority of Sol and the Confederation. He turned to his communications officer. Ensign, fleet-wide communication. All vessels, all tercios, all legions, all tyrannies. The young man's hands danced across the display before giving him a thumbs up. This is Archduke Amaranth, Cyrus began, his voice reaching the 10 million souls aboard his fleet. Fleet to battle stations. Prepare for close-range astral warfare. Attack pattern Dragon's Maw. Sunbreak and Moonbreak detachments. Sally forth. Waning Moon and Good Hunt. Gavilan sighed before descending to the lower deck to rally his knights. Thana simply leapt down, her grav harness letting her float like a graceful, demonic pigeon. All Justicars, prepare for boarding operations. Full panoply. Infantry, ready for counterboarding. Highlander Guard, report to Base 6 for special ops. The orders had been given, but Cyrus could feel it through the unity, the sickness of pre-battle angst, the moment where men found themselves tested not on the anvil of war, but the grindstone of patience that eroded a man's psyche before the first shot was fired. They needed something. They were going against what had been portrayed as an invincible foe, outgunned and outnumbered once more. And he needed to spark that flame that had made the Sixth Order earn the monikers it had earned. Brothers and sisters, we are the fleet that broke the Hierophant's armadas over Luna, over Neptune, over Uranus. You have followed me into the very gates of a hell not Dante nor Milton themselves could have ever dreaded over Pluto. And you won. He let a pulse of righteous fury, of anger sharpened, flow through the unity, entering the soul core of the Lady Morningstar, and then bouncing in psionic resonance. Like colorant on water, it tinged the entire fleet in that same thirst for vengeance. Like a spark on freshly spilled fuel, it lit up around the whole fleet. And now, he needed to give breath to those flames. These things, these Xylx believe they are here to harvest all biological life. They won't stop until they have darkened the skies of our spheres, harvested our children, fed on our parents, and blotted out proud soul from the galaxy. Wrath, anger, hatred, fear, determination. All of it boiled over in the gestalt consciousness of the fleet, bouncing and amplifying itself on every ship's soul core, as the PAIs were overwhelmed by the birth of so many extreme emotions among their crews. There was his breath. He smiled. What is our response to that? The speakers were connected to the whole fleet, so they could hear their commander speak. The response was as such coming from every vessel, every fighter, every troop compartment, so deafening that every power plate automatically deployed the helmet of every knight to counter the auditory assault. Cyrus could have warned Adik and the Confederate delegation. He could have lowered the volume, or simply put it in video for them to see. But he wanted them to feel it, to understand it, raw. Hic sunt dracones. The bridge of the Lady Morningstar trembled with the first howling from the Navy elements, including his very bridge crew, who slammed their fists over their hearts in acknowledgement of their fellows, the more calm and more level-headed among the armada. Hic sunt draconis! Hic sunt draconis! Bellowed all infantry and armored elements from their barracks, bunks, engineering bays, and vehicles. He could feel the raging thunder as the war striders thumped their feet against the floor of their loading bays, of heavy armor reeving their engines in unison. Hic sunt draconis! Bellowed them all again, joined by every knight on the fleet. If the sound was impressive, the feedback from the fleet's unity was cathartic. A wave of cool determination, cold fury, flaming wrath, vivid eagerness, an iron will that sweet away every doubt, fear, and hesitation in the hearts of those who heard it. Crimson gold armada, breakers of tyrants, demon slayers of old, named in honor of the fleet under whose might the sun did not set, who broke storms and tempest to return home to defend it. The great and cherished one, stand to your stations and stand to your oaths. Sol invicta. Deus misericordias. Cyrus cut the channel and looked on ahead, rising from his command throne, bringing his own psionic high from the furor of his men under control. Cooler minds prevailed in war. Prognosticars, do you have a seer window? The prognosticars, the specialist psionics of the fleet, deep inside the bowels of the ship spoke back, deep in concentration. Seer window confirmed, Archduke. Trust to 68%. Too much traffic for anything above that. 68% was suboptimal, but a remarkable commander didn't forge his victories in good odds, but in frightfully bad ones. Then we will have to make do. Cyrus crossed his hands behind his back, savoring the command, the moment. Back again to killing that which lurked in the dark. Just like on Mars, Pluto, and Earth. He hoped the abominations of this galaxy got the memo once and for all. All vessels, fire at will. Cyrus dived into the ebb and flow of the mantle, and the dragon woke up. The void bleeds azure fire in front of me. The entire Crimson Gold Armada, more than 10 million soldiers, veteran from the Solar War, undefeated since the retreat over Rhea, opens fire. Thousands of kilos of tungsten rounds pushed forth to a small percentage of the speed of light, and imbued by the soul core of the vessels with some psionic resonance of the crews, are sent forth in a wall of death by my command. The veritable wrath of the dragon unleashed. It takes 3 minutes for the ammunition to register on Xylx sensors, barely after images on the debris field. The same to actually hit. It does not matter. Using the predictions of the prognosticars, the gunnery crews have already sent the next volleys, using the established seer windows to be feed coordinates to where the enemy vessels will be, and they fire once more. During the 15 minutes it takes my fleet to reach what we call haymaker range. No ship stops firing. Almost all of our shots will hit, or at the very least force enemy ships to move where other shots will land. It's hard to dodge a rain of death when every drop knows where you are going to be. The first volley is mostly composed of Hydra munitions, which detonate dozens of kilometers from the Xylx fleet, and among them, sending millions of small darts of tungsten into enemy ships. Most hit shields. Some are sent scattering through the void. But the biggest behemoths are not the targets. The psionically charged darts serve a triple-fold objective. They annihilate smaller craft, like fighters and light corvettes, their shielding lackluster to the volume of impact to which they are subjected. The chem shields of the Xylx vessels going out in sickly green flashes as the darts mail pincushions of the frigates and support ships. They strike enemy stealth ships, marking them to auger nets, whose operators cross-reference with their other instruments to determine where hidden vessels are, if there are any, for command to keep in mind. And thirdly, it leaves clouds of magnetically and psionically charged metal that plays havoc with any close-range sensor. It's a blow for the eyes and ears of a fleet, which are why the Xylx don't see the next volleys coming. And these ones are not Hydra ammunitions, but Damocles-class kinetic killers, designed to skewer foes of such tonnage and armor as their biggest ships. Not that seeing them come would do any good. Now comes the lunge for the throat. The volley of killing shots, having fed on the improved seer windows of our first volleys, is precise and devastating. Shields collapse under enough firepower to cleave cities asunder. the continuous streams of slugs concentrating to overload shields and penetrate armor. I'll give those monsters their due. Their void-faring mockeries of life are resilient. My naval officers take pics and scanners from the regenerating wounds of enemy vessels, and where mucus expands to protect the holes in their hide and stop venting atmospheres. They are a hideous attempt at life, like the titanic cousins of the fauna in the seas of Europa, deadly, predatory, and devoid of any mercy. To all that, one should add the Xylx cunning and group thought. They are a race of predators, like sharks in the dark void between stars, devouring everything that moves, uncaring of consequences. Well, here we bloody well are. The motherfucking consequences. On my personal implants, a countdown starts, in deep ruby numbers. I block it there so I can keep control of those numbers. The Jovian part of the fleet divides itself into 2 detachments that begin to separate themselves from the ecliptic plane in opposing directions, forming squadrons that start to envelop the enemy fleet from above and below, maintaining their cadence of fire without relent. To the railgun batteries follow long-range torpedoes, missiles, and ordnance perfected over 5 years after the last war. The first real blood is for the Damsel of Midnight, who guts a Xylx heavy cruiser, long-range plasma torpedoes finding its exposed belly and venting its guts into space. A full salvo from its ventral and spinal batteries cuts it in almost half, killing it for good. Cassandane grips my shoulder with a feral smile. My wife is in her element. She is as much a warrior as I am, but she is an animal of a more political disposition. She enjoys dissecting enemy strategies and armies like a surgeon with a scalpel. I am a sword, a well-wielded and much experienced sword, but I hack the enemy apart in a much different manner. This is my rodeo, so she leads her Martians, but she is enjoying it nonetheless. She has always enjoyed seeing me work. I will confess that it is a reciprocal thing. The Xylx find it in them to retort to us. Balin grunts at the response fire and begins to coordinate fields of fire and redirect energy from generators to maintain shield integrity. Himiko shadows her husband, making sure the sensors are clean and no surprise finds our exposed backs. They work with the minimal use of words, and my veteran bridge crew needs no more to make the massive vessel underneath our feet work like a clock to unleash its firepower, capable of making a god kneel. The countdown trails lower and lower. Another part of the plan. I see catalytic destroyers and plasma batteries fire back at us. Their fire is slower, but they pack a greater punch, so we do not stay put. Shields flare alive with the pressure of incoming enemy fire, and our escorts race forward to intercept whatever ammunition they can. Defense squadrons and Oni-class drones throw themselves into the path of incoming ordnance, blowing it out of the void. Flak fills the view screens as the point defense systems of the Lady Morningstar spew death. Some gets through still, even with the overlapping fields of fire and interceptors running amok with the incoming bio-torpedoes. All that living ordnance is swatted from the void one after another, but they keep coming, and every second we close in, the volume of fire increases. Shields flare alive with blue flashes of plasma, but mostly hold. My flagship has endured much worse punishment. Others have not. Escorts die when they don't manage to pull away in time. A frigate gets clipped by a fragmenting munition and slams into the shield of a much more powerful dreadnought. A destroyer receives concentrated fire from 6 torpedoes. The light in the dark scores 2 more beam strikes with its heavy prow lance batteries before 3 bio-torpedoes dance around its escort vessels and blow its bowels open to the cold void with sickly green detonations, acid eating away at the armor faster than any other substance I have ever seen. The countdown on my personal display trickles down still as some of my ships splash yellow, red, and even black. The casualty estimates skyrocket when concentrated fire manages to cut one of my battleships in half. It's the Apocrypha. That old Martian behemoth refuses to die, still firing while vivisected, as frigates pick up the non-essential crew. It's empty of Martian knights today. Its part in the fight is almost done, but took the brunt of so many enemy squadrons it's a miracle it got so close. I feel the deaths, as fire, acid, decompression, and the icy void claim them in fistfuls of bright lives, extinguished in seconds. I feel their pain and anguish and fear, and do my best to drown their last moments in the unity of the fleet, to make them understand they are not dying alone. It's poor comfort for dying men, but it's all I can do. It hurts to have the connection ripped so suddenly, but the blows land on raised mental defenses. The deaths wash over my psyche, and concentration is barely affected. The only palpable effect is the new fuel to my fury. Morning would come later. Victory is first. The timely deliverance avenges them with a barrage of its spinal batteries, followed by 2 ship killers, Alpha Bravo atomics. The offending ship dies screeching in the uncaring void, its merciless gods uncaring of its fate. The countdown reached 0. The view screen darkens. Flashes dawn the void with newborn suns that join the twin stars of the system, man-made and wrathful as a scorned goddess. 12 Omega-level atomic warheads from my entire fleet slip into their defenses, detonating into pupils of light and sun death, using the trail of the railguns and their scrambled sensors from our first volley to hide their signatures. That, and the Xylx have never been hit by atomics in space. I made my entire senior staff check. Thrice. Adapt to that, you assholes. Entire enemy squadrons die to the same ammunition we used to kill Pluto. They are the only 12 my fleet had, so I made sure to make them count. The newly established sanatorium forbade me from taking more than those 12 planet glassers, out of Sol. The 30 megaton atomic warheads were terrifying enough that I understood and approved of their limitation. But they never gave me limits on the Alpha Bravo atomic ordnance of 3 megaton yield I could take. And when I took command of the Armada, I made sure to stock up on naval ordnance. The void fills with them now, thrown at 3 different angles at the enemy fleet, still worried about the kinetic slugs reaping havoc on their lines. A catalytic beam from an enemy Leviathan scythes the void to hit our frontal starboard shield, forcing me to look away from the brutal flash of colliding energies. The Lady Morningstar's soul core bellows furiously at the attempt on our lives and feeds the gunnery crew's new targeting data. I see the frontal rail batteries spin to a new angle and fire a steady staccato of ammunitions that singe the void in between. I subconsciously check what they have fired in retaliation. A smile dawns on my face. The 3 frontal hexabarreled batteries spew forth 18 Icarus Infernum shells, which detonate into brutal thermobaric fusions of emerald light, creating balls of fire in the void that devour the biological Xylx ship. The lack of oxygen matters not, as long as the silverite tetraphosphorus solution has something to burn. Those sickly green flames won't die. The Martian segment of the fleet ignites full thrusters to close the range to the preferred tactic of the red planet's inhabitants, while the Mercurians simply vanish from sensors, to fight this war like they like it, unseen and unexpected. Martians, on the other hand, like it close and personal, in the void, in the ground, in politics, and in bed. And I can attest to each one of them. Just as the rearguard of the Xylx fleet has managed to turn their Leviathan-sized ships to us and form actual ranks to meet us gun to gun, They fail to spot the squadrons I sent forth under the cover of the Hydra munitions and the constant fire of my ships. My hunters in the void, mostly Venusian and some elite Jovian pilots, dive from below and above the enemy fleet into the gasp they form to better coordinate defense against our ordnance and the gaping holes my 30-megaton nukes inflicted as my ships stop their barrage. The Xylx have 3 seconds to wonder why we have stopped firing before the first hunter-killer missile impacts an enemy ship. 1,000 more follow the first, and a behemoth goes up in detonations. Then, my wolf packs of corvettes and wings of fighters are among them, killing anything their guns allow them to. The enemy's dwindled squadrons engage mine in neck-breaking dogfights among the enemy's ships, hunting, killing, and saving each other. Then, my Mercurian ships materialize back to reality with short-range missile salvos and heavy railgun fire, and they are gone again. Here begins their dance of the summer breeze. I almost pity the Xylx. To fight the children of the desert world is to die of 1,000 unseen cuts. Against the whole enemy fleet, we would have been encircled and butchered. But whatever Udique told the Felisiusin has worked, because the defense fleet sails forth to pin the Xylx vanguard between their ships and the defense guns. I read on transit that Zenus is the name the Felisian give to their spirit of death. It's an appropriate name. The satellite fires thousands upon thousands of weapon batteries, more a space station than a satellite, right at the incoming fleet, disgorging squadrons of fighters and corvettes, and using its docks to take in damaged ships and repair them back on action. It's the only anchor holding this battle together, and I couldn't be more thankful for it. Enemy elements closing on Zenus, sir. Fleet Mistress Akadindi, a stern Martian of rough features but striking red eyes, offers me a data pad for me to check. I don't. The Iron Damsel is the second best admiral of Sol, and I won't disrespect her immaculate work, but double-checking it. I might fuck it up. Looks like they are going to attempt a planetary assault. Are those walking corpses mad? Those orbital defenses will mince them to bits. Gavilan is once more upon the middle bridge, in full panoply, the roaring lion of House Lancaster shining bright on his chest. The dark figure covered in crimson and white that looks like the feverish machinations of Bram Stoker's worst nightmare stalks the bridge behind him. Thana is more than ready, her excitement like a blood-tinged start in the mantle. I just gave her the war she didn't even know she wanted. Well, the war both husband and wife wanted. Only Gavilan knew what he wanted, but he has known since he set eyes on Thana, so many years ago. Their problem, not ours. I muse, getting up, my own panoply sinking to theirs. I turn back to Akadindi. How long before we are on Haymaker range? 5 minutes to our destination, sir. She gestures toward the biggest monster inside of their fleet, almost 10 kilometers of void predator, spewing bioplasma like a punctured vein. I took the liberty of marking their biggest ship for you. My thanks, Fleet Mistress Akadindi. I offer her the fleet's scepter, which allows her to command the fleet by mere thought. She accepts it with grace and glee. It's her astral duel to win now, and the woman does enjoy her job. The armada is yours. Safe travels, Lord Amaranth, she says, almost smiling, before turning to Cass, my dictator. Smile, Akadindi, my wife muses. If I die, you might get a shot at my chair. Never for a million worlds, my dictator. She hates political play as much as my wife does, and doesn't have half the skill she has developed. She dreads having to take the Martian dictator's chair. She glances at me in a way that makes me gulp. Although I might take that shot with your husband instead. Sorry, Callie, he is off limits. My wife, in her limitless maturity and wisdom, slaps my armored ass with a metallic thud. I massage the bridge of my nose. Pity. Guess I'll have to make do with the politician one. For a moment, I elevate a prayer for my brother Adamis's safety. If Calliope Akadindi wants him, he isn't going to have much of a say there. Ladies, please. We have a fleet to kill, I say with a tired sigh that makes some of my bridge crew snicker among themselves. Gavilan is laughing, and Thana is cackling madly at my expense. Fuckers. Akadindi sends a sneer our way before executing a crisp salute. The rest of the bridge crew mimics her perfectly, a second of solemn air filling the entire bridge. We answer in kind with our fists banging over our hearts in the old knightly ways. Hic sunt dracones, my lord, she says. She knows I will be back. I have a reputation for that. Carpe diem, fleet mistress, I respond, knowing that the day is as good as won as long as I pull my part of the job. I walk out of the bridge, my knights and those of my wife forming tyrannies around us. I know she is calling her elites to her, so the fabled Hetyroi can be unleashed once more. I speak 4 dreadful words that Gavilan started to coin for us in our earliest days on the Tempering, when we were scared children wanting not to die, or in some cases like mine, to die. And that wouldn't earn their terror till the European Blitz, and that every man, woman, and child in soul today knows. 4 words made legend now. Who knows? Maybe when this war ends, they will resonate in every civilized world in whatever is left of our galaxy. Or maybe they will fall into nothingness, under the bleached bones of our dead species, under the light of a dead soul. But the Xylx, they will know the words, and they will remember, even if I have to carve them in the beating heart of every single one of them I cross paths with. I will scar them into their bloody psyche. Whatever happens, that will be my victory. When the galaxy dies around those bastards, they will think of us, because I have just released the harbingers of their end. Who the fuck am I kidding? We were never chained to begin with. Tempestari. Unchain the storm. The skyline was disgustingly beautiful. Buildings of a dozen architectonic styles rose like spires over the great mountain range, each of them a testament to the culture, power, and economic abundance of the world that had built it. The taller the spire, the more money. The taller on the mountain it had been placed, the higher the power in the Confederate Senate. It was a particular concept the Solar Chancellor did not enjoy. He enjoyed even less that the authority had been given such a low place in the mountain, almost city level. It wasn't as Ilurin Von was an ugly place. It was still a galactic capital, all bright towers and ample parks, filled with public oratory halls and debate parlors. But the Solar Chancellor had never had an eye for urban design, beyond logistical organization, and lately, urban warfare. He had been watching for good defensive choke points, high elevation over clean ground, good fallback points, and potential defensive garrisons among the city's streets. He was sorely disappointed. He wagered that a full thunder could wreak havoc throughout most of the city, and the shield guard would be able to do little to slow them down. The streets offered too much cover for advancing enemy elements. So many statues, monuments, and lecterns of public speaking, while the buildings had been made for aesthetics, not sturdiness. One round from a mastodon or an Excalibur would bring a whole building down, and then detonate in the one behind. Any armored push would go uncontested, for there would be little useful cover the defenders could exploit against enemy armor. And the anti-air defenses were a bad joke that still irked him. he had resorted to sketching a new defensive system for the city. It was a tedious, useless job. One couldn't simply create a fortress city by adding walls and guns to an already existing city. Places such as those needed to be built from the ground up as defensive positions. He was simply bored. After his meeting with the Confederate Senate had been over, all he had wanted was a cold glass of Caljuban brandy and to sleep. The assault on his senses had been brutal. A Senate session was already a tiresome affair, but when one was the only psionic in the room, it was so much worse. For the Chancellor, it had felt as if someone had been using his head for blade work practice. Speaking of which, he should take a moment to check where the Crimson Gold was. Would they have engaged the Xylx over Katarsis already? He began to dance with the idea when his comm buzzed. He rose from where he had been sprawled, straightened his robe, put the cape back over his shoulders, and sat down. A second later, the Supreme Chair of the Confederate Senate entered his office. The Anaxian nodded his blue, fin-adorned head respectfully, and it took a moment for the Chancellor to remember what customs this particular species sported, before bowing back with a hand gesture that signified gratitude for a visit and offered respect, and indicated a chair. "My thanks, Solar Chancellor." The alien's voice carried a certain monotone to it that was slightly compensated by the hand gestures he made to represent emotional states or inflections in its tone. That, and the reading of its anima, the soul, so to speak, were what made the Solar Chancellor able to notice the chair was a bit anxious. "I can see our session has been hard on you." "I have seen gentler meatways," grumbled the Jovian. He smiled at the joke until he realized that his counterpart had not understood, so he explained. "Infantry term, for when two sides are trying to take a narrow ship corridor. Both sides have to spend men and knights to reach the other side until one side breaks, or retreats." "That is a descriptive definition. You should listen to knight terminology. It's just as flowery, crude, brutal, and entirely uncaring of anyone's feelings, but funny when you have a dark sense of humor. But to answer your question, it's quite hard to form a coherent argument when I can hear the thoughts of more than 2,000 senators inside my ring-cursed brain. I see psionics do have their downs." The alien tried to hide his slight smugness and satisfaction in finding a weak point in human connection to the mantle, but the Chancellor could feel the emotions rumbling inside the alien's mind. "Do not look so smug, you blue-skinned worm with deliriums of grandeur. If it was my brother here, you would not be smiling so much." But his brother was probably fighting for his life in Fleet now. The Crimson Gold should have engaged the enemy Xylx armada over Katarsis by now. He tried not to think about the possibilities. He had lost a mother to void combat already, a father to night operations, and a few dozen friends to boarding actions. And there would be plenty of the three for his brother to handle. Thank the stars all the monarchs had agreed to take the enemy on together. "Some, I am afraid," he acquiesced. "But we make up for it. Speaking of which, what can I do for you, Supreme Chair?" The Anaxian tilted his head to the side in a manner that the Solar Chancellor had begun to interpret as showing doubts. "I had questions. Number the Confederate Senate had questions they didn't have the irons to ask me to my face, so they sent you to do so, hoping I would be more amenable to a private conversation." The human let out a sigh before rubbing his neck and attempting to excoriate all satisfaction from his face and voice upon seeing the slight shock flare over the Supreme Chair's anima. "As I said, we make up for the downs of psionics. I distinctly remember your sister mentioning humans would not read others' thoughts in polite company. mused the Anaxian. I distinctly remember deciding you were not polite company the moment you tried to swindle the Aurorans 2 days ago with that egregious mining pact, retorted the Chancellor, arcing an eyebrow. I could take that as an affront, Solkar Chancellor. The Supreme Chair's hands went through half a dozen hand signs for anger, offended emotions, dislike, and outrage. The Chancellor shrugged. So, could I take the 24 senatorial guards outside of my door? The Anaxian did not freeze, almost as if he had expected that particular topic to come up. He simply composed his features and asked, "Would they make a difference if you choose violence?" The Chancellor kept staring at the Supreme Chair, letting his mind brush against the consciousness of the half a dozen Highlanders out of his door, as the sergeant requested permission to clear the Confederates from their doorstep. The Chancellor denied him, before sending a quick snap thought towards the trio of shrouded Mercurian Tempestari that were perched on the outside of his window. They confirmed their readiness and reassured his own assessment of the lack of chances the senatorial guard had to even breach his door. No, they would not. He brushed the matter away. But you knew that already, so I suppose you brought them to keep appearances with the rest of the Senate, which means you are not here to belittle me or my own, but to ask something out of me. So, please, do so. Now, the Anaxian had to hide the flare of shock and appreciation. He failed, but the Chancellor noted it nonetheless. When I suggested to the Senate to send your fabled Crimson Gold Armada to assist the Phylixians over their homeworld, I left out a particular reason for it. I imagined so. The Chancellor moved a finger, and the decanter, a gift from a certain Martian fleet commander, levitated to him until he had served 2 glasses. He tried not to think about what he was drinking. He loathed sharing it with such political vermin, but strange times made strange bedfellows. The official reason for needing all possible help sounded too sensible for the Senate. The Phylixians are particular, so much like your own kind, truly. The Chancellor raised an eyebrow in question as to whether that had been a compliment, an insult, or both. How so? They put stock in deities and discarded ideas of honor, piety, oaths, and moral high standing. There was a flash of discomfort and anger that did not pass unseen through the chair's anima, but the Chancellor chose to not react to it. Never mind that his brother would have taken offense to that comment, as would have 3 full quarters of humanity. And yet, they are fearsome soldiers and warriors, and we do need them. But they are savage, brutal animals. The Supreme Chair made a series of hand gestures that signified dismissal, contempt, and even cautionary fear. Not that the Chancellor needed them to read what the alien was feeling. Still, it was amusing to see the contrast between what he was showing with his hand gestures and what he really felt. They don't know when to stop or bow their head. They think they are the ultimate force in the galaxy, and that the morals they dictate are right, because the stars have said so. And their military prowess and technological advancement is outstanding, especially for a race with so few colonies. You didn't send my fleet as a relief effort. The Chancellor had pieced that much together. Not that it had been hard to do so. You sent them as a threat, a cautionary tale of what happens if they don't behave. Sci was not going to like that one bit. Oh, not at all. You see, we did need your fleet. We did need your knights. But I have read your brother has a reputation. The Chancellor felt a spike of anger run up his back, heating the chair beneath him. It always came back to that, didn't it? No matter how much his brother tried to escape that horrible reputation, it was too well earned to be free from it. He eyed the mountain range through the window, and for a moment wondered just how far the forest his brother could and would erect if the Confederation betrayed Sol would stretch, and how the galaxy would look at it and call him by that same moniker. Indeed, rumbled the man with a sigh, and you are worried the Xylixians will ask more than you are willing to give in exchange for their cooperation. Very much so. And right now, it's not the time for selfishness or individual goals. The Xylixians will ask a great deal of us. They despise our so-considered heathen ways. And if they demand much of us, so will every other member and allied race, murmured the Solar Chancellor. But us. You humans fight for the thrill of the fight and the righteousness of warring against evil. I hoped the Xylixians would see it as an example. Or as a threat, thought the Chancellor. Or both, if Sci does it right. He felt a spike of fierce pride rush up his spine. Yes, the Xylixians would either follow out of example and friendship, or follow out of fear, but they would help save the galaxy. Oh, do not fret, Suorame Chair. Adamas-Amaranth let an unsettling smile play on his lips. If experience tells me anything, it is that my brother can cast quite the fearful image. Back into the launch bay. Back in the mouth of hell. Back to the killing edge. Nightfall. The word terrifies me still. Enclosed in titanium and silverine, feeling the cold pressure of gravitic launchers preparing for dislodgement. The foreboding encasement of the null fields that will make sure my body will not liquefy when we reach maximum velocity. I fear like almost nothing before. I can feel the assault orbital pod around me tighten, adapting to me and my armored body. A small PAI, psionically augmented intelligence, basic and primal with maternal instincts, makes every possible preparation to get me ready for the holocaust I'm about to be thrown into, like one of the million pebbles thrown to kill a giant. I can feel the other pebbles around me. Fear, excitement, horror, numbness, zealous fury, maddening anger, hungry panic, pious determination. All of this swirls around me in the gestalt consciousness we all share, linked as one by the might of the vessel's soul core. The Lady Morningstar gives us the last reserves of energy it can spare and rotates her belly drop launchers to face our target. Into the breach. Once more, unto the breach, my friends. Once more into the fire of zealous battle, like greyhounds on the hunt for the games afoot. A Sicilian quote. That makes me laugh somehow. I have never been the best philosopher, but indomitary sayings, those I know. The reason does sadden me a bit. My dad really liked them. He used to say that no matter what, a warrior's greatest weapon was his mind, and that wisdom and wit were the best maintenance. Then voices pull me from my introspection, not my own inner devils and angels tugging at the strings of my madness, but my friends pulling me back to sanity. This is a bit too reminiscent of... I was trying to remember all the times we have been in this absolutely ring-cursed situation, but I don't think I have the time before launch. It's good to see Gavilan has such high hopes for the day. He is as scared as I am in the mantle, but his cheery disposition helps disperse some of the tension. I blame the boss. He and his overdeveloped sense of honor. He gets us in deep shit all the time. Thana growls. I try not to think how awful her launch bay has to smell. She and her terror squads enjoy never cleaning their armor. They think it adds to the fear effect. They are not wrong. They also will not admit they are afraid of washing what bits of good luck have kept them alive till now. I thought you loved to be in deep shit, Akuma. Himiko seems the only one calm. I envy her. She has the ability to dislodge herself from mortal worries and become so calm, it is terrifying. It gives you the chance to put your particular abilities to shine. Well, yeah, I do like to be in deep shit. Doesn't mean I cannot complain to the boss for it. I have 100 knights willing to take your spot in the spear tip, Thana, if you wish to stay behind, I suggest, smiling at the snickers and booing from several terror tyrannies. Do that, and I will shank you in the balls, threatens our she-devil. Those are mine, my dear bloodhound. Shank him in the ribs. He has spares. My wife pipes up, her voice heralding the laughter and crude jokes her Martians enjoy so much, and a sympathetic response on the mantle. This is why I like our Martian friend. She is fun, Thana asserts as the ship around us trembles under heavy fire. I try not to think about it. We truly married craziness, my good fellow. Gavilan assets, with a mock, mournful tone. No, I married a princess of Mars. You married a bloodthirsty gang member. I chuckle. Your craziness was implied. Mine was an extra feature I did not ask for. Are you complaining about anything, dear? My wife's tone is sickeningly sweet, the kind of tone that heralds either 3 hours of dueling or another type of physical activity that will leave me just as exhausted and sweat-plastered. Not in 100 years of madness, my love. I quickly capitulate, electing laughs and mockery all around. I check on Balin. He does not speak, deep in pre-battle rites and prayer. Ionians had always been taciturn and laconic, but none like my old friend. He sends a single assent through the unity of our tyranny, and I chose to not bother him anymore, focusing on the snickering. Yes, yes, laugh it up, you bastards. I smile at their humor. It is a good way to vent the nerve-burning fear of the pre-fall moments. In a few seconds, we will be soaring stars in the firmament, directed at a demonic mockery of a ship made of mutated flesh and biosteel, filled with genetically theft-killing machines. I would be afraid if it was the first time I found myself in such a conundrum, but it is not. On my power plate, honor scrolls with 6 different spheres shine bright. A soaring sword over my home moon for the shattering of Ilium, falling lightning bolts over Uranus for the harrowing, a tornado over Mercury for the long dusk, a rushing storm over Venus for the day of woes, a falling hammer over Earth for the breaking of Luna, and a barren, broken world for the breaking of the Hierophant over Pluto. Of those 6, I only feel responsible for the last, and I did that with nuclear fire from more than 100 vessels. But the hand that gives the order should swing the blade. So, I carry both the blame and glory. Before I can ponder anything else, Cardinal Alexander's voice echoes as he utters the words that lead to any night deployment such as this. The elderly priest's voice carries all the furor and determination of a man a third his age, and all the wisdom of the cosmos made whole. Black banners of vengeance raised to the solar winds herald the coming hour. Words of courage spoken in the halls of our forefathers echo in the mantle for eternity. Let our hope shine, the horizon burn, and their sky shatter under our falling stars. A second of mighty silence is followed, and every believer whispers something. An amen escapes my lips. I declare nightfall. The words of sentence are spoken. Fear shoots up my spine. Thump, thump, thump will sound the grav catapults. Last time I waited as 300 men were thrown to the gates of hell before my ticket to death was spent. But today, I am in command, and I lead by example. The first pod out is mine. I surge forward. My stomach free falls right to my heels as my vision flickers. A ball of vomit catches halfway up my esophagus as blackness claws at the corners of my eyes. It's not my first drop. I push through it all and watch the spectacle in front of me this time. The jaws of my fleet have closed around the Xylx. Hounded up and down their formation, with the Philesians on their back and the wounded but not dead Confederation raging still. They are divided, unfocused. My knights are barely specks in the brutal brawl around us, swarms of flies around crashing elephants. A light show that puts the Battle of Ilium to shame springs around me, catalytic beams contrasting the traces of railgun batteries, missile salvos following torpedo strikes lighting the void with detonations. Hundreds of ships disseminate into the close-range brawls, where Martian dreadnoughts shine with barrages of broadside pulsar fire and quick-response boarding actions. My PAI lights up with displays. Allied ships, enemy vessels, incoming and outgoing boarding parties, and ammunition. Fighter wings, rescue operations, atomic ordnance being launched and intercepted. Utter bedlam. I am a bullet fired directly at the enemy ships. My armor blinks and whirs with the non-verbal communication. Overwatch, the deployment deck deep inside the Lady Morningstar, uses to watch over us. I assure my launchmaster everything is optimal, as tyrannies form behind me in pyramid formation. The Xylx's greatest and most dangerous ship is highlighted on my display by the name of Goliath. I smile. Always liked that story. Maintain tight fly patterns, my good fellows. Gavilan's voice has lost most of its joviality. The Archduke of Ganymede is deep in the fight now. We cruise to point defense range, and then we burn ion to contact. The Laurent and the Blood of Epoch will provide our entrance. They see us. Enemy squadrons in an intercept course. Balin rumbles, somewhere to my left. I make direct contact with Overwatch as my display lights us with the Xylx version of Strikecraft, small reptilian creature without legs, but sporting wings and claws and bioweapons, twice my size. Harpies, my men call them. It's appropriate. Fleet. Enemy flies on path, requesting swatting. At the other side of the line, a woman of southern Ganymedian accent acknowledges my request before giving me the bad news. Negative, Dragon 1. We don't have the range for Lucifers in the sky. The AA ammunition would work wonders here, lighting the void with fire, but the Lady Morningstar appears in my HUD engaged in a brutal knife fight duel with 3 Xylx heavy cruisers. She is winning, but her guns are all strained by the engagement. The 120th will give you a red carpet. Good hunting. Copy that, fleet, I answer, watching as the main spinal battery of the Morningstar carves one of the cruisers in half with a precise barrage of Damocles kinetic killers. Its soul core, much more in harmony with my armor than any other ship's, roars victorious before snarling at another of the bioships. It kills it seconds later, pieces of its revolting hide hull slamming into the bright armor of my flagship. Christ and the Lady be with you all. With you as well, my liege. She cuts communication, already working with another boarding team or squadron of fighters in need of tactical support. Thana grumbles something about airheads and their overdeveloped sense of superiority. But she cheers and hoots as the rest of her terrors when our formation of full silver angels is surrounded by more than 100 flying void predators. They are cool and calm on the mantle. Pilots are perhaps the most tempered breed of soldier in my fleet, only surpassed by the Blackwatch. But then again, they are the ring-cursed Blackwatch. Gleaming with the colors of the Crimson Gold Armada, the 120th flights to cover us, the Damascus Incorporated craft, battle-scarred Mark, 3 Telesto-class fighters, looking like birds of prey with wings bent forward for the hunt, railguns and plasma accelerators in place of claws, and wings bright with the wash of ion engines. "This is Captain Overberry, sir, of the 120th Airborne Rangers." The lead Telesto swerves above us, officer marks on the wings in gold. The man is pure South European stock, the intonations of R sounds giving away he is probably from Sacrament, the blessed city. "Heard you had a fly problem?" "Right on my flight path, Overberry," I intone, feeding coordinates. The man's anima flares with predatory hunger at the new prey on his sensors. I smile. "Copy that, Dragon One. Crimson Herald, start the clock, 120th, on me, disperse and crush. Let's clean a corridor for our August friends." And they fly past us, 100 good spears thrown at the swarm in front of us. Railgun fire lights the void up, and missiles follow suit as our escort disperses the swarm of enemy interceptors. Squadrons engage and pilots start their duels. This particular battle lost in the holocaust of war that surrounds us. The void in front of us is not clean yet, but it's a lot clearer. My men beg leave to join and aid the fighters, but I deny them. Knights in full panoply are a nightmare to almost any force, but Voidcraft, in open space, is not one of them. The 120th has their job. We have ours.
"Enemy battleship is an intercept course, boss."
Thana growls.
"They will get in the way."
A massive manta-like figure appears over the shadow of a burning Martian cruiser, the Themyscira, spewing bioplasma at the wounded ship. The cruiser retorts with a full spread of close-range torpedoes, maximum spread, but the Xylx ship simply rams the Martian ship, closing the distance with mind-numbing speed, not letting those torpedoes properly arm, and tearing the ship in half. The deaths echo in my mind, as does the frustration and anger of the nearby ships at seeing the last act of defiance from their fellows amount to nothing. An undulating subsonic cry is picked by my armor, an almost mocking tone to it. The bioship fires a dozen spores into the still flickering wreckage to harvest the dead and finish survivors and the wounded. And like that slithering waste of biological material makes it personal. "Then we go through it," I respond, feeding new entry parameters to my knights, directing my fresher tyrannies to clean the remains of the Martian ship and help the survivors, if there will be any by the time they get there. "Laurent, Blood of Epoch, I am going to need an early breach on target designated Lamia." "Understood, Dragon One. Epoch will assist. Breaching shells loaded. Where do you need us to knock you a door?" "Gut me the bastard if you please, Epoch." "Happy to. Lighting on the rail." The Blood of Epoch, a Jovian Crusader-class heavy cruiser, fires its ventral battery guns before the breaching missiles are halfway to the target. The slugs slam into shields, but drop them enough for two of the missiles to slip past the downed defenses and the slow-to-respond point defense fire. They hit an area of 5 decks, covering it in black fluid. There is our breach zone. I take the middle deck, sending half of my men to disperse among the lower decks, under Indicator Luther's tyranny, and the other half to the upper decks, under Indicator Vithia. You will be alone upon entry, my liege. Vithia Solikari, born of the house of the famed shipbuilders of Ganymede, interjects. My wife chuckles into the link. No, he will not. Behind me, more than 100 Martian Heteroi signatures come to life as our second wave speeds up to join us. An instant later, hundreds of more signatures lit up the void. The 66th Shock Assault Tercio, my Stormwalkers, form up on our objective. Our launch partners, the double-strength 20th Martian Phoenix Legion, are by no means less intimidating. Together, I wield a hammer of 30,000 men and women, hardened veterans with earned honor scrolls and Phalera to cover the entire Victus Forum, and while barely a tenth may be proper solar knights of a half-dozen variants, the rest are by no means less lethal, and they all are eager for the hunt. What a picture we must give. A sea of infantrymen, marines, stormtroopers, and knights in full panoply, armors bright with house and line colors over our world colors. Red for Mars, black for Jupiter, white for Uranus, gold for Mercury, silver for Venus. A veritable army of soaring angels, hollow banners deployed, creating the symbols of legions, tercios, brotherhoods, and regiments in hard light over the void, heralding the coming of a well-deserved vengeance, enshrined with the light of dying ships, detonating atomics and tracing munitions. I divide thunders and wings, and direct entire companies to board secondary targets and rescue breached ships. Overwatch feeds me all the intel I need. This is the main thrust of my fleet, and dozens of ships in our path are suffering and inflicting boarding parties upon the foe. It reminds me of the Jovian Blitz, except this time, I am not a freshly minted boy, marooned on the ground of his home watching as his betters save his moon and his home sphere. Today, I must be the savior, and this time, I brought enough ring-cursed ships to do it right. By the time I have eaten my way to the wounded Lamia, my 30,000 blades are deployed and ready, half 100 engagements boasting Martian and Jovian reinforcements to level the playing field, and behind me drops the sharpest among them. Thanks to Overwatch, I can see where the rest of the combat groups are moving. To my right, almost 20,000 kilometers from where I fly, thousands of sand-colored armored figures slither soundlessly in the dark, using gravity and sly bursts from oxygen tanks to silently latch themselves to enemy leviathans. In a few minutes, those ring-cursed Medjay, the Mercurian variant of the Solar Knight, will be inside their ships. They will not see what kills them. High Sultan Ishaldin's attack group will gut a dozen ships before the Xylx know what is going on. Sneaky, Ash. Sneaky as always, my good fellow. Go put some sand on their eyes and blades in their spines. To my left, the story is much different. Where Ashildin's stealth and my speed and daring buy us the needed edge to close in, the Uranians go in a very different path. They close with hammer ships to close range, and fireboarding torpedoes and assault javelins into the foe. Then, they unleash the wrath of the frozen world, where the Huskarls overtake enemy ships and tear them apart, before Aesirs and Jarls with entire brotherhoods of warriors rip and tear their way in near maniacal bloodlust. Ivar, Floki, and Freya will vivisect the Xylx and test the mettle of their warriors head-to-head and use unbound savagery to win the day. You do not take on Huskarls on the open field, much less so when backed up or mounted on Aesirs. No, unless you fancy having your innards weaved into a flag. As I examine the battlefield, Balin overtakes me, hammer in tight hands, the black-marked decks closing with incredible speed. Time to dance, I guess. We are within point defense range, Sci. Gavilan chuckles dangerously. Full tilt, my knights. I growl in the unity. Do not stop until you are on the other side. We engage our grav wings, and we shoot forwards, becoming alive in every damned sensor in 100 clicks. It does not matter. The Lahmia turns its belly to present its heavier point defense batteries to us. Balin growls for missiles, and a dozen clusters of guided ammunition soar from launchers in all my knights. They fly several times the speed of sound to detonate as soon as they are the object of target locks, each one deploying multiple, faster, and smaller payloads. The enemy ship works in mysterious ways, and no one knows if they have biological computers, or if the ships are alive and in full control of all its systems. It matters little. Hundreds of explosive darts push past the wall of flak to transform the point defense batteries, into minced meat and burned metal, punctuated by a crescendo of blooming detonations upon the belly of the ship. Our path clear, formations tighten. Breach, I say. Balin grunts his assent and hits afterburners into the black wall. He activates the switch for the molecular bonding of the breaching agent. The surface of the wall mutates from hard biosteel of elastic biomaterial. We crash like comets through a glass wall, ripe for the slaughter.